What if the asset you have been holding was not just overlooked by the market, but was deliberately targeted, systematically suppressed, and methodically handicapped at the exact moment it should have gone parabolic? What if the reason XRP did not perform the way its fundamentals suggested it should during the largest altcoin season in crypto history was not because the market rejected it, but because a coordinated campaign running for years through regulatory channels, academic institutions, and the highest levels of government was specifically designed to stop it? And what if all of that is not a theory anymore? Because the documents, the emails, the confirmed connections, and the public statements have now surfaced, and the picture they paint is no longer deniable. Today, I am not going to speculate about any of this. I am going to walk you through what has been confirmed, what has been documented, and what it means for where XRP goes from here. Now that the suppression has failed, the lawsuit has been won, and the infrastructure that was being built through 5 years of legal warfare is now being positioned at the center of global finance. Because here is the part most people are missing. The attack on XRP was not random. You do not attack something that does not matter. You do not coordinate years of regulatory pressure, academic influence, and enforcement actions against an asset that poses no threat. The ferocity of the opposition was itself the clearest signal of XRP's potential. And now that the opposition has been exposed and defeated, that potential is no longer theoretical. Welcome back. I'm the calm analyst, no emotion, no conspiracy, just the documented record and what it means. Let's go. Let's start with the math, because the suppression thesis is not based on feelings. It is based on numbers that are almost impossible to explain any other way. March 2020, the entire crypto market hits its cycle low. Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP, everything resets. And from that low, the 2020-2021 bull run begins. Let's track what happened. XRP went from approximately 0.14 at the March 2020 low to a peak of approximately 196. That is a gain of roughly 16 times. 16x on your capital in a bull run is not a bad outcome. By any historical standard, it sounds impressive. But here is the number that should stop you cold. Ethereum, starting from the same March 2020 low, went approximately 57x, from $8.74 billion in market cap to over $578 billion. A difference of $570 billion in added market cap. XRP added approximately $82 billion in market cap during the same period. If XRP had performed the same as Ethereum, the same percentage move, nothing more, XRP would have added $574 billion in market cap instead of $82 billion. XRP would have been priced well above $10 at the peak of that cycle. Now ask yourself this brutal question. What happened in December 2020, right in the middle of that bull run, right at the inflection point where altcoin season was beginning? That specifically targeted XRP and Ripple? The SEC lawsuit, announced December 22nd, 2020, right as every other altcoin was beginning its largest move in crypto history. The timing is not subtle, it is surgical. Brad Garlinghouse said it directly. Before the SEC got involved in the crypto markets, XRP was the second most valuable digital asset, ahead of Ethereum. Then the SEC got involved, said Ethereum is probably okay, ETH went up, and then they sued Ripple and XRP went down. His words, not a theory. A documented sequence of events stated publicly by the CEO of the company at the center of it. The lawsuit did not just suppress XRP's price for a quarter or two. It suppressed it for roughly 4 years. 4 years during which partnerships could not be signed with U.S. institutions, exchanges delisted XRP from U.S. markets, institutional capital stayed on the sidelines, and Ripple had to fight for its survival instead of focusing entirely on growth. The counterfactual? What XRP and Ripple would have built without that 4-year drag is a number nobody can calculate precisely, but everyone holding XRP has felt in their portfolio. Now let's go deeper, because the lawsuit was not the beginning of this story. It was the visible surface of something that had been running much longer underground. At XRP Australia in 2026, former Ripple communications and marketing executives spoke publicly about what they experienced inside the company during the years of attack. The language they used was striking. A mysterious dark cloud, a headwind they could not quite identify, like there was an invisible negative force attacking in various ways, and they could not locate the source. Chris Larsen, co-founder of Ripple, had been raising concerns about specific individuals and institutions for years. He specifically identified the MIT Media Lab and its director, Joy Ito, as having something against XRP and Ripple. At the time, people inside Ripple were skeptical. You focus on what you can control. You keep building. You do not chase shadows. And then the Epstein files were released. Inside those files, there are emails that reference Ripple and Stellar specifically, describing them as bad for the ecosystem being built, as damaging to their company. These emails date back to 2014, and the connections that emerge from those files include the same names that appeared years later in the SEC enforcement action against Ripple. Gary Gensler, the SEC chair who presided over the lawsuit, had direct ties to the MIT Media Lab. Joi Ito, who ran that lab and whose emails reference Ripple and Stellar as threats in 2014, had publicly raised questions about Ripple's place in the crypto ecosystem in 2015, asking explicitly whether old coins like Ripple were inside or outside the crypto community, framing the answer as a matter of who gets to define the community architecture. That 2015 framing matters enormously, because what Ito was describing, identifying which projects are inside the network and which need to be stamped out like unwanted forks, is a roadmap for what happened to XRP 5 years later. The institutions that benefited from XRP's suppression were identified as the insiders. XRP was identified as outside. And the enforcement mechanism that carried out that decision was the SEC under Jay Clayton, who announced the lawsuit in his final act as chair, and Gary Gensler, who continued it. This is not speculation. These are documented connections between confirmed individuals, confirmed emails, confirmed public statements, and confirmed enforcement actions that produced a confirmed multi-billion-dollar suppression of an asset that was, by Brad Garlinghouse's direct account, the second most valuable digital asset in crypto before the targeting began. Let me do the math on what the suppression actually cost, because most people have been looking at this backwards. The standard framing is XRP underperformed. The actual framing should be XRP was artificially prevented from performing. And the artificial prevention is now over. Think about what was lost during those 4 years. US exchange listings were pulled. That alone removed XRP from the primary access point of the largest retail and institutional investor market in the world. Partnerships that would have been announced were delayed or canceled because US counterparties could not take the regulatory risk of associating with an asset under SEC enforcement action. Ripple's US business development effectively froze while its global operations continued. And yet, through all of that, Ripple built. The ODL network expanded. The institutional partnerships outside the US continued. Hidden Road was acquired. G-Treasury was acquired. The DTCC integration through Hidden Road was assembled. The MasterCard pilot was developed. The TCS-BAN-CS architecture was connected. The governance relationships with Bank of America, Royal Bank of Canada, Bank of Tokyo Mitsubishi, Santander, Standard Chartered, CIBC, and Westpac were maintained and deepened. Ripple did not just survive the attack. It used the time during which U.S. institutional access was blocked to build deeper international infrastructure than it might otherwise have prioritized. The suppression that was meant to kill it instead drove it to become embedded in financial infrastructure across every major market except the one trying to destroy it. And now the regulatory environment in that one market has reversed completely. The asset that was the second most valuable in crypto before the targeting began, that was specifically handicapped during the largest bull run in crypto history, is now on the other side of that suppression. The legal battle has been won. The regulatory environment has inverted. The infrastructure that was built during the suppression is now being activated. And the capital that was blocked from entering XRP through US channels for 4 years now has a clear, legally validated pathway to enter. That is not a recovery story. That is a coiled spring story. Now let's stack the institutional validation, because this is where the suppression thesis connects to the present moment. The attack on Ripple was coordinated precisely because the people behind it understood what XRP was positioned to do. You do not marshal regulatory resources, academic influence, and years of enforcement action against something you believe will fail on its own. You attack something you believe will succeed, and succeed in a way that threatens existing power structures. What did XRP threaten? Brad Garlinghouse identified it directly. The SEC was picking winners and trying to limit US innovation in crypto to Bitcoin and Ethereum. What he was describing is regulatory capture, the use of government power to protect incumbents and eliminate competitors. XRP threatened the existing correspondent banking infrastructure. It threatened the fee structures of the global payment system. It threatened the monopoly on cross-border settlement that has been owned by a small number of very large, very well-connected trusted institutions for decades. Those institutions had relationships with the people who ran the agencies and labs and foundations that targeted Ripple, and they used those relationships to attempt the elimination of the most direct competitive threat to their business model. They failed, and here is the part that most XRP holders have not yet fully processed. The failure of the suppression is not just a legal outcome, it is a validation signal. The ferocity of the opposition was the clearest possible indicator of how serious the threat was perceived to be. If XRP were irrelevant, it would not have required a 5-year coordinated campaign involving the SEC, the MIT Media Lab, and the most powerful people in crypto policy to attempt its destruction. The intensity of the attack was proportional to the perceived threat. And now the question is, if they were afraid enough of XRP to do all of that, what does XRP actually become in a world where they failed? Here is the catalyst timeline that makes this moment unlike any previous moment in XRP's history. The Clarity Act is in final negotiation with White House support and bipartisan backing. When it passes, the legal framework that was used to attack XRP, the ambiguity about whether digital assets are securities, gets resolved legislatively. Every exchange that delisted XRP during the lawsuit era will have legal clarity to relist. Every U.S. institution that kept XRP at arm's length will have a defined regulatory pathway to engage. The capital that was blocked for 4 years gets unlocked simultaneously with the asset's first legally clean operating environment in the US. XRP ETF products are advancing through the pipeline alongside Solana ETF applications. When institutional-grade ETF wrappers exist for XRP, the institutional access that was specifically targeted and blocked by the suppression campaign becomes not just permitted, but packaged and distributed through the same channels that brought billions of institutional dollars into Bitcoin and Ethereum after their ETF approvals. The DTCC's tokenization service launches this year with Hidden Road, acquired by Ripple, integrated into its back-end infrastructure. G-Treasury's $16 trillion in annual payment flows is being connected to on-chain settlement rails. MasterCard is piloting RLUSD settlement on the XRP ledger. The Bank of Canada ran a tokenized bond pilot at the same moment the Royal Bank of Canada governance partnership was confirmed. Every one of these developments was built during the suppression period. Every one of them is now activating in a regulatory environment that has inverted from hostile to supportive. And the market that is pricing XRP today has not yet absorbed the combined effect of 4 years of institutional infrastructure development plus 4 years of artificially suppressed institutional access suddenly becoming available simultaneously. Let me speak directly to the people who held through all of it. Through the delisting, through the years of flat price while everything else ran, through the people who called you a fanboy, a bag holder, someone who just did not understand that XRP had lost and needed to let go. You did not misread the asset. You were watching an asset under active suppression by people who understood its potential better than most of the market did. The very people who attacked XRP the most aggressively were the ones who had read the infrastructure most carefully. They were afraid of it for a reason, and their fear, revealed in documents, confirmed in emails, connected through the public record, is the strongest possible validation that the thesis was real. Ripple did not settle, and that decision, which looked questionable during the dark years of the lawsuit, now looks like one of the most consequential decisions in crypto history. If Ripple had settled, XRP would have been classified as a security. The institutional use cases would have collapsed. The ODL network would have faced existential regulatory risk. Every partnership being activated right now might never have happened. They fought for 4 years. They won. And the infrastructure they built while fighting is now being positioned at the center of a global financial system transition that is accelerating faster than even the most optimistic timelines predicted. The suppression is over. The infrastructure is operational. The regulatory environment has inverted. The US capital markets are opening. And the asset that was handicapped during the last bull run that missed the 57x that comparable assets achieved is entering this cycle without the handicap for the first time. Here is what I want you to carry forward from everything we covered today. XRP was the second most valuable crypto asset before the SEC got involved. The lawsuit was announced at the exact inflection point of the largest altcoin season in history. The connections between the people who targeted Ripple, the institutions that benefited from its suppression, and the documents now surfacing in the public record are no longer theoretical. They are confirmed. Ripple did not settle. It fought and won. The infrastructure it built during 4 years of suppression, Hidden Road, G-Treasury, MasterCard integration, DTCC connection, 7 governance banks across 5 continents, is now being activated in a regulatory environment that has inverted from hostile to supportive. The Clarity Act is in final negotiation. The ETF pipeline is advancing. The DTCC tokenization service launches this year. The US capital markets are opening to XRP for the first time in 4 years, with legal certainty they did not have before. You do not attack something for 5 years with coordinated regulatory, academic, and institutional pressure unless you are afraid of it. The people who tried to kill XRP told you everything you needed to know about its potential. By the ferocity of their attempt to destroy it, they were afraid of it. They were right to be afraid of it, and they failed. Comment vindicated below if you held through the dark years and made it to the other side of this analysis. I want to see who was paying attention when the room was quiet and everyone else was calling you wrong. Stay patient. Stay rational. History does not reward comfort. It rewards the people who paid attention when the pressure was highest and the narrative was most hostile. They tried to kill it. They couldn't. Now we find out what it was always meant to become. We don't wait for the future. We plan for it.